heartless one, the evil monster, who dare you take the lives of my daughters Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them. And they also trusted you.
We loved you like a son. We trusted you. Your faithful wife trusted you. Your children adored you. I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives.
There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't arrive all at once. It settles slowly. It fills the small spaces first. Unreturned calls. If you want to uncover more chilling mysteries and dive deep into cases that will haunt your thoughts, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss a single twist in the next story. August of 2018, before the world learned any names, before news vans lined a quiet Colorado street, before language like monster and evil entered the conversation, there was only absence. A mother who did not answer her phone. Children who did not arrive where they were expected. A house that looked intact but felt unfinished. And a man who spoke a lot, without ever saying very much. Welcome back to the channel. Here we move slowly. We don't chase shock. We examine patterns, silences, and what people choose not to say. If you value that kind of storytelling, quiet, careful, and grounded in evidence, consider subscribing and stay with us until the end. Because this story was never really about what happened in one night. It was about what had been happening for a long time. From the outside, the Watts family appeared almost aggressively normal. Their lives unfolded online in bright, shareable fragments. Birthday cakes, matching pajamas, home videos with forced cheer and practiced laughter. Shanann Watts curated moments the way many parents do through her phone, through captions that suggested momentum, optimism, belief in forward motion. Her voice was present, consistent, searching at times but always reaching outward. Chris Watts, by contrast, appeared mostly as a background figure. He smiled when prompted. He stood where he was placed. He said very little. And for years, that silence passed as stability. Shannon's parents saw a man who showed up. He worked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't drink heavily. He didn't explode. In many families, that is enough to be considered safe. What they could not see, what no one could fully see yet, was that this was not calm. It was withdrawal. In 2025, when Shannon's parents speak now, they don't describe a sudden realization. They describe hindsight. They talk about moments that didn't register at the time. Small discomforts that felt too minor to name. A tone. A pause. Chris Watts rarely argued. He rarely contradicted. He rarely pushed back. Instead, he absorbed. And absorption can look like patience, until it hardens into something else. Financial records later showed pressure building quietly beneath the surface. Credit card debt. Mortgage strain. A life maintained at a level that required constant belief. Shanann believed in solutions, in talking things through, in fixing. Chris believed in escape. Not physically at first. Emotionally. Their conversations shortened. Responses came later. Affection became procedural. None of this set off alarms. Because nothing happened. That is one of the most difficult truths of this case. There was no warning in the traditional sense. No dramatic threats. No visible rage. What there was instead was erosion. Shanann reached. Chris receded. She planned. He complied. She spoke. He went quiet. And silence, when rewarded long enough, learns it doesn't need permission. Children experience change differently. Not through arguments, but through routine. A missed bedtime. A father who doesn't linger. A hug that ends too quickly. Caregivers later noted subtle shifts. The girls asked for their mother more. They mirrored tension they didn't understand. Nothing dramatic, just absence beginning to take shape. Around this time, Chris Watts discovered a version of himself that felt unburdened. Not in confrontation, but in fantasy. An affair offered him something his real life did not. A space without history. A future without repair work. In this imagined world, he was not a husband navigating debt and expectation. He was uncomplicated, desired, unencumbered. Fantasy doesn't demand accountability. It doesn't require conversation. It doesn't ask you to stay when things get heavy. And for someone practiced in avoidance, that matters. What Shanann's parents say now is not that they missed obvious danger. They say they misunderstood silence. They believed quiet meant peace. They believed compliance meant commitment. They believed that a man who never raised his voice must be controlling it well. What they didn't yet understand is that some people don't manage anger. They store it. And stored resentment doesn't dissipate. It reorganizes. When Shanann traveled late in her pregnancy, she spoke openly about the strain in her marriage. Not publicly as accusation, but privately as concern. She wanted reconnection, counseling, conversation. Chris agreed, verbally, but his actions grew thinner. Texts became shorter. Emotion flattened. Plans existed only when prompted. Psychologists later described this pattern not as panic, but as disengagement. A slow exit. By the time Shanann returned home, something had already ended. Not violently, not dramatically. Internally, Chris Watts had stopped participating. And when a person decides they are done, but refuses to say it out loud, everything that follows becomes distorted. Responsibility feels optional. Obligation feels imposed. Other people's needs feel like obstacles. The morning Shanann and the girls were reported missing, Chris Watts spoke calmly.
It fails me the second I try and trust it always fails me. So you said that your cell phone, is it off right now?
Yeah.
That would be great because we can't have anything like buzzing, vibrating, ringing, that kind of stuff. So this will take at least a couple hours to do the polygraph, just because it's a real structured type of interview process. I have to go through a bunch of things with you. You're going to get the same polygraph that I gave someone last week. So it's very structured, and we go, in order and that kind of stuff. And you're going to know the wording to all of the questions I'm going to ask you on the test before we even take the polygraph. So don't. A lot of people come in here and they think, oh, they're just going to, attach all these components to me and then just start asking me random questions that I've never heard before, and of course I'm going to react to that. That's not at all how polygraph works. And you're actually going to probably know more about polygraphs than anyone before you leave here today, just because I explain everything to you and how everything works, okay? Obviously, you're probably nervous about taking today's test. Honestly, I would think something is wrong with you if you weren't nervous about coming in here to take a polygraph. Yeah. Even if people are like, I don't have anything to hide, it is nerve-wracking. And I have taken tons of polygraphs, obviously, in my training.
Prosecutors focus not on rage, but on planning. Not on loss of control, but on choice. Because understanding motive does not excuse outcome. And silence, when it finally breaks, does not absolve what it concealed. In 2025, Shanann's parents do not speak with anger alone. They speak with grief sharpened by understanding. They say they wish they had asked harder questions, that they had recognized withdrawal as danger, that they had known quiet could be lethal. But hindsight does not exist in real time, and perfection often disguises decay. This story is not about a man who snapped. It is about a man who left, long before he acted. It is about how entitlement can feel like peace, and avoidance can feel like survival, and how some crimes are not explosions. They are exits. As we continue, we'll examine how the investigation closed in, how language unraveled, and how the search for explanation collided with irreversible fact. If this story matters to you, if remembering Shanann, Bella, and Celeste matters, pause here and share your thoughts in the comments. Not speculation, not blame, reflection. Because silence thrives when stories aren't examined. And remembrance is an act of resistance. The investigation did not advance through drama. It moved through patience. Investigators returned to the house not because it looked disturbed, but because it looked preserved. Shoes still by the door, beds neatly made, children's belongings untouched. The scene did not suggest flight, it suggested interruption. Chris Watts remained cooperative, almost eager. He volunteered explanations before questions were fully formed. He filled silence quickly, then just as quickly withdrew. Language analysts later pointed out something subtle. He spoke about his family as if they were already gone, using past tense, creating emotional distance without realizing it. Control does that. It convinces you that you are managing perception, even as perception closes in. When inconsistencies emerged, they did so quietly. A timeline that shifted by minutes. A route that changed. A detail that appeared only after it was suggested. None of it explosive. All of it cumulative. This was not a man overwhelmed by chaos. This was a man navigating exposure. The first confession did not come with clarity. It came fragmented, partial, protective. Chris Watts initially offered a version of events that reduced his responsibility, one that framed the outcome as reaction rather than decision. Investigators did not confront him with outrage. They waited, because avoidance collapses when it runs out of room. What followed was not emotional release. It was disclosure without remorse language. Details were shared clinically. Descriptions lacked interior life. This absence mattered. Experts later testified that emotional detachment did not mean emotional overload. It meant emotional shutdown. The fantasy Chris Watts had constructed could not survive contact with reality. In that imagined future, consequences were abstract. Children existed only as obligations. Marriage existed only as weight. Reality reintroduced faces, names, finality, and once that happened, the fantasy dissolved. What remained was accountability. In court, the focus was narrow by design. Not on social media, not on public opinion, on facts. The prosecution emphasized sequence, choice, opportunity. They did not argue rage. They argued resolve. Because rage burns out. Resolve carries through. Shannon's parents listened, not to relive, but to understand. They later said the most painful realization was not the violence. It was the clarity, the recognition that their daughter had been trying to save a relationship that had already been abandoned. Not by absence, but by silence. The children were spoken of carefully, not as symbols, not as footnotes, but as lives structured by routine, by bedtime rituals, by laughter, by expectation. Their absence registered not in spectacle, but in quiet spaces that no longer filled. Toys unused, rooms untouched. Grief like silence accumulates. When sentencing arrived, there was no theatrical reckoning, just finality. The court made clear this was not an accident, not a momentary lapse, not an unthinkable outburst. It was the outcome of sustained disengagement and entitlement. Explanation was offered. Justification was not. In the years that followed, public fascination never fully faded. But fascination is not understanding. It flattens. It simplifies. It assigns labels that feel satisfying but reveal little. What Shanann's parents emphasize now, in 2025, is not evil. It is avoidance. They speak about how dangerous it is to excuse emotional absence as calm, how easy it is to misread compliance as care, how often silence is mistaken for safety. They also speak about their daughter differently now, not only as a victim, but as a person actively trying to hold her family together. Someone who believed in communication, in repair, in presence. Her openness did not protect her, but it mattered because it exposes the imbalance that defined the relationship. This case forces an uncomfortable recognition that violence does not always arrive loudly, that some of the most catastrophic outcomes are preceded by politeness, by agreement, by nodding along, by someone slowly deciding they are no longer accountable to the lives they inhabit. Psychologists caution against oversimplification. Chris Watts was not devoid of emotion. He was selective with it. He invested it where it required nothing in return. Fantasy offered admiration without demand, escape without explanation. Reality asked him to stay. He chose not to. In reflecting on this case, it becomes clear that prevention does not always look like intervention. Sometimes it looks like attention, to withdrawal, to shrinking language, to emotional flatness, to the absence of conflict where conflict should exist. Because disagreement can be repaired, silence rarely is. Shannan's parents say the hardest part of speaking now is knowing their insight comes too late. But they speak anyway, because awareness is not retroactive, but it is transferable. Their hope is not closure. It is recognition. This story lingers because it refuses simplicity. There is no single moment to point to, no clear turning point, only accumulation. Day after day of disengagement, choice after choice of avoidance, until the exit was no longer metaphorical. We often ask why someone didn't leave. We ask it of victims, of families, of bystanders. We ask it less often of perpetrators. Why didn't he leave? Why didn't he speak? Why didn't he choose separation over annihilation? The answer is not mystery. It is entitlement. Leaving required honesty. Staying required responsibility. Silence required neither. As we end this story, there is no resolution to offer. Only reflection on how carefully curated lives can hide collapse, on how calm can coexist with danger, on how listening to what isn't said can be as important as hearing what is. If this story stayed with you, if it made you reconsider what silence can mean, take a moment to engage. Share your thoughts below, not to sensationalize but to reflect. Remember Shanann. Remember Bella. Remember Celeste. Their lives mattered beyond the way they were taken. And understanding how this happened is not about fascination. It is about refusing to look away. Some crimes announce themselves. Others whisper. And the most dangerous ones are often the quietest.